155 points on the Pacers, the second most points in a game in franchise history. But here's the deal. The Celtics starters, they have been absolutely dominant this season. Look,
they are just overwhelming teams with talent. The deepest, most talented team in the league, and certainly this is a Boston team whose championship window, not just this year, but going a few years forward,
they might be, actually, let me just go ahead and say this, they are the best team in basketball, top to bottom, 13 players.
The Celtics are really good this year. The Celtics completely transformed their team after a disappointing playoff exit last year against the Miami Heat. Ever since this moment, they have looked like the clear favorites from the Eastern Conference and even the whole NBA. The Celtics this year rank both top 5 in offensive and defensive rating and have the best starting lineup in the league. With that being said, if the Celtics get over their playoff humps this spring and get their 18th franchise championship, putting them over the Lakers, does that officially make them the best franchise in the NBA? Or is there more to it than just championships? But what if there was a way to use purely objective metrics to measure the success of every NBA franchise? Well, as of now, the Celtics still have 17 championships. The C's are tied with the Lakers all time with 17 rings. Of the 77 total NBA championships won over the league's history, the Lakers and Celtics make up 34 of them, so they've won about 45% of all NBA championships. After the two Twin Towers on the left side of this graph, the team with the third most amount of rings is the Golden State Warriors with 7, thanks to Steph Curry in the modern NBA. The Bulls come in at 4th with 6, the Spurs at 5th with 5, the Pistons, Spurs, and Heat all have 3, the Bucks, Rockets, and Knicks all have 2, and the rest of the league either has 1 or 0, so most of the expansion teams over the last 30 to 40 years. But championships aren't everything when comparing teams. Otherwise, Bill Russell would be the GOAT of the NBA with that mindset. Another very simple but very telling stat to look at is win percentage. How often does your franchise win games historically? And I'll let this video show you the evolution of the dominant franchises over NBA's history. Credit to Desert Fox TV for this video. The Washington Capitals, no, not the hockey team, was actually the original GOAT franchise. In the 50s, the Knicks eventually caught up to them when the Capitals discontinued. The Knicks kept this lead for a while until Bill Russell was drafted, and the Celtics skyrocketed past New York. And the Celtics just ran away with their win count, where they won 13 championships in the next 20-year span. In the 80s, the Lakers with Showtime definitely got closer, but the Larry Bird Celtics kept their lead. The Celtics, once Bird retired, really started to slow down in the 90s. And then eventually in the 2001 season, the Kobe and Shaq Lakers passed the Celtics up for most amount of wins. And looking more into the last 15 years, it's really been a neck-and-neck race between the two teams. This video only goes up to 2021 where the Celtics were winning. In the current day, the Celtics have about 100 more wins than the Lakers. But what we're going to look at right now is win percentage, not overall win count, because otherwise only about 5 teams could reasonably compete. And we've seen enough seasons from every franchise where one really good season isn't going to completely skew the results. And the team that has the highest win percentage of all time is actually the San Antonio Spurs, who have won over 60% of their games. The Celtics are a hair over the Lakers for second place. After that, teams like the Utah Jazz, Phoenix Suns, OKC Thunder, and Portland Trailblazers all follow them up, winning about 53 to 54% of their games. The Spurs franchise was founded in 1997. Not including this season, the Spurs of their 46 years in the league have had a winning record in 36 of those years and have appeared in the playoffs 38 of those years. The consistency from San Antonio has been unreal. And speaking of consistency, that's actually what we're going to look at right now. Playoff consistency is also another very important factor to look at when comparing teams. Consistency in this video is a stat that tracks how often a team qualifies for the playoffs. And this is a good way to measure how evenly spread apart teams' dominance is. The Los Angeles Lakers have the best playoff consistency mark, making the playoffs 82.9% of years. The Spurs are slightly behind them at 81.3%. And after that, you have the Celtics, 76ers, Blazers, and Miami Heat, all behind them at around 60 to 70%. So we've looked at championships, we've looked at overall record. We've looked at playoff consistency. How else can we reasonably rank these teams? Well, because this is my video, I'm going to use a metric that isn't even related to on-court play. It's net worth. For most teams, it actually takes some success and skill to build up your franchise's net worth, and other teams are just founded in America's biggest city. But this is my video, and who's going to stop me? In terms of which team brings the most dollars in, Steph Curry and the Warriors are by far the most valuable NBA team, sitting at $7.7 billion. They have a $1.1 billion lead against the second place Knicks and a $1.3 billion lead against the Lakers. And these three teams are far ahead of everyone else. The next closest team is the Celtics at 4.7, and everyone else is either around there or slightly below that mark. But there's still one more pretty solid way to rank teams. Another way to judge the success of franchises is to look at their all-time great players they produced. So what I did was took the NBA's top 75 anniversary team from 2022 and ranked each franchise based off which team had the most players and the best players. And because this list was made 2 years ago, I've made slight updates to account for the success of recent teams and players. If a player has made solid enough contributions to that franchise, their name is put on here. So for example, Kawhi Leonard with the Clippers wouldn't count here. He just hasn't produced enough results there. Or Kevin Durant with the Nets or Suns. So let's go through this list. A lot of players and a lot of teams on here. Now you might be asking, how exactly are you going to rank each team against each other? Well, what we're going to do is first flip the values of each player ranking. So Damian Lillard all the way at 75 would be worth 1 point, and Michael Jordan at 1 would be worth 75 points. John Stockton at 25 would be worth 50, and Nate Thurmond at 50 would be worth 25. So players that are better historically are worth more points. So let's go through the results. As you can probably expect, the LA Lakers are the best team on here with a combined score of 606. The Lakers have LeBron, Kareem, Magic, Wilt, Kobe, and Shaq, 6 top 10 players of all time, and they have Jerry West and Elgin Baylor at spots 19 and 20. They also have George Mikan at 29, and they have James Worthy at 57 and AD at 72. The LA Lakers have a total of 11 players, complete dominance over the players category. The next highest team is the Boston Celtics with a score of 363. They also have 11 players, but don't quite have as high of a score as the Lakers. The C's have 2 players in the top 10, that being Bill Russell and Larry Bird. They have 2 more players in the top 30 with KG and John Havlicek. Both the Celtics and Lakers combined have more top 75 players than the whole bottom half of this list. Yeah, the Hornets at 30 all the way up to the Clippers at 16. They also combine with the same amount of top 10 players with 8 as the rest of this list. The third place team in terms of players, to my surprise, is the Milwaukee Bucks. They have 4 players on here with Ray Allen, Giannis, Oscar Robertson, and Kareem. What ranks them so high is 3 of these 4 players are ranked in the top 20, Giannis at 18, Oscar at 12, and Kareem at 2. The 76ers are 4th place with AI, Wilt, Moses Malone, and Julius Erving. The Warriors are 5th with Curry and Wilt, and the Spurs are 6th with Tim Duncan, Kawhi Leonard, and David Robinson. There are 2 teams on this whole list without a single top 75 player of all time, that being the Memphis Grizzlies and the Charlotte Hornets. So now I think we have enough information to properly compare franchises against each other. Let's make our way from the worst franchises to the best franchises. Of all of the 30 NBA teams, I've grouped them into levels. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the one we're going to go over right now, the embarrassing level. So to start us off with the embarrassing level, we have 8 teams on here. From worst to best, we have the Timberwolves, Hornets, Grizzlies, Pelicans, Magic, Clippers, Nets, and Kings. And I'm not going to get too deep into these bottom dwellers because I don't want this video being an hour long. But there's no team on this level that has a better record than 500, and 5 of them are under 40%. These 8 teams have a combined 1 championship, which was from 73 years ago, and have 11 top 75 players. I mean, there are teams that are ranked higher that have as many players as these 8 teams combined. Overall, just some of the least desirable franchises in the NBA. Moving on to level 5, these teams are historically bad, but not horrendous like the previous ones. The Washington Wizards and Bullets are ranked 22nd. They have 1 championship in 1978, and have a record of 2,264 and 2,779, which is below average by a good amount. And ever since the 70s and 80s, they have 2 top 75 players with Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes. The 21st ranked team is the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers have won 3 championships in the ABA, but we're not counting those. In the NBA, they have a pretty average team, hovering around that 50% mark in terms of all-time record. From the 80s until the present day, they've been a pretty consistent playoff presence. They made the finals in 2000 and have made multiple conference finals appearances with Reggie Miller, who is their only top 75 player. The Cavs are ranked at 20th, and thank God that they landed a player named LeBron James in the draft, because otherwise they'd be in the conversation for the worst franchise. The Cavs have a terrible franchise record and playoff consistency mark. Really, the only bright spot here for the franchise was their 2016 championship and their 5 finals appearances with LeBron. The Raptors are ranked 19th, who are a very new franchise founded in 1995. The team has honestly been pretty laughable besides the days of DeMar and Lowry and the single year that Kawhi was there when they won their lone championship. Overall, just a very below average franchise. The final team of level 5 is the Detroit Pistons, who you might be surprised to see here with 3 championships. But ever since the Ben Wallace days, where you could get away with a common foul for assaulting another man, well, actually they did this in 2 different eras. Yeah, ever since these times, this team has been pretty laughable with 2 playoff appearances in the last 15 years. The team has a slightly below 500 record at 2,816 and 3,139. And they have 3 championships and 3 top 75 players with Dave DeBusschere, Dennis Rodman, and Isaiah Thomas. Now, on to level 4 franchises, who I consider average teams historically. At 17th place, we have the Utah Jazz. Although they don't have a championship under their belt, they have 2 top 25 players in Malone and Stockton, and have been a pretty consistent playoff force since the 80s. The OKC Thunder and Seattle Supersonics place at 16th. The Sonics have a championship in 1979 with Jack Sikma. Besides this, they've been a fairly competitive team with Gary Payton and Sean Kemp in the 90s, and KD and Westbrook in the 2010s, both teams making finals appearances. They have 4 top 75 players in KD, Westbrook, Gary Payton, and Ray Allen. Overall, a decent franchise. The Denver Nuggets rank at 15th. They just got their first championship in the team's history just last year. They've had multiple good teams like the David Thompson Nuggets in the 80s, the Mutombo Nuggets in the 90s, the Melo and AI Nuggets in the 2000s, and the Jokic Nuggets recently. And they have 2 all-time players in Carmelo Anthony and Jokic. Overall, a pretty decent team. The Hawks are 14th, who haven't won since the days when they were in St. Louis, and there was 8 teams in the league. But the Hawks have some decent rosters, like the Bob Pettit Hawks in the 60s, the Dominique Hawks in the 80s and 90s, the Al Horford and Jeff Teague Hawks in the 2010s, and the Trae Young Hawks, who made the conference finals just 3 years ago. And the 13th place team is the Phoenix Suns, who are actually the highest ranked franchise on here without a championship, but the Phoenix Suns make up for it with multiple top 75 players like Charles Barkley, 2-time MVP Steve Nash, and Jason Kidd. The Suns have also been a contending team for many decades now, with the Paul Westphal Suns in the 70s, the Barkley Suns in the 90s, the Steve Nash Suns in the 2000s, and the Devin Booker Suns recently. Now, moving on to the level 3 franchises. They're above average and really good historically. The Dallas Mavericks rank at 12th. Their first 2 decades, from 1980 until Dirk was drafted, were really rough years, but after that rocky patch, they've been a consistent playoff team with both Dirk Nowitzki and recently with Luka. They have 1 championship in 2011 and 1 top 75 player in Dirk. The Blazers are ranked 11th, and fun fact, they actually won their only championship in their franchise's history during their very first playoff appearance in 1977. The Blazers have some pretty solid rosters, like the Bill Walton Blazers in the 70s, the Clyde Drexler Blazers in the 90s, and the Damian Lillard Blazers in the 2010s. They have 2 top 75 players in Clyde Drexler and Damian Lillard. Now, cracking into the top 10, we have the New York Knicks, who actually have the second highest valued franchise in net worth at $6.6 billion. The Knicks have 2 championships in 1970 and 1973 with Willis Reed and Walt Frazier. They have some other competitive teams like the Patrick Ewing Knicks in the 80s and 90s and the Melo Knicks in the 2010s. But it's been pretty bad for the Knicks ever since the turn of the 21st century. My Milwaukee Bucks are ranked at number 9. The Bucks won a championship in 1971 with Kareem and Oscar Robertson, and they won in 2021 with Giannis. Ever since this 50-year time gap, they've had some decent teams like the Sidney Moncrief Bucks in the 80s and the Ray Allen Bucks in the 2000s. And like we mentioned, the Bucks placed third all-time in player ranking with Kareem, Oscar Robertson, Ray Allen, and Giannis all in the top 75. And to cap off our level 3 teams, we have the Houston Rockets. The Rockets also matched the Bucks and the Knicks with 2 championships. The Rockets, ever since the days of Moses Malone, have been a very consistent playoff presence. On top of their 2 chips in the 90s, they have 2 finals appearances, one led by the 6th-seeded Moses Malone Rockets in 1981, and the other led by the second-year Hakeem Olajuwon Rockets. Thinking more recently, they've also had pretty good teams with Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady, and James Harden Rockets in the 2000s, and the James Harden Rockets in the 2010s. And now let's move on to the level 2 franchises. Our number 7 ranked team is the Miami Heat, who despite being only around for 36 years, have 3 championships and multiple finals appearances on top of that. The real reason why this team has been so successful with so little history is consistently great coaching. The Heat went from Pat Riley in the 90s and early 2000s to Stan Van Gundy with the 2006 championship team, then back to Riley, and then Eric Spoelstra, who's been amazing ever since 2008. Having 2 of the greatest basketball minds of all time directing your teams certainly helps, and creating one of the league's most deadly super teams with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh also helps. The Warriors are at number 6, and like we talked about, are the highest valued franchise at $7.7 billion. Now, I know many of you guys are probably thinking the Warriors should be placed higher, but let me explain. Golden State has the 3rd most amount of finals of any franchise at 7. They won 2 rings as the Philadelphia Warriors in the 40s and 50s. They won another ring with Rick Barry in 1975, and have 4 rings with Steph, Clay, and Draymond in the last 4 years. But what brings them down is their horrendous gap between Barry and Curry. The gap between Rick Barry getting old in the late 70s until Curry became a superstar. The Warriors absolutely sucked during this time. From 1978 until 2012, a 35-year span, the Warriors made 6 playoff appearances in total, and none of them being more than the conference semifinals. They had consistent dogshit records. So yeah, the team was good in pockets like the 70s and the first decade they were founded in and recently, but for the majority of this franchise's history, they've sucked. The Chicago Bulls are the first team to crack the top 5. They have 6 total championships, all with Jordan in the 90s. But this isn't the only good part of their franchise. They've had some solid teams like the Chet Walker and Artis Gilmore teams in the 70s, and good teams with Derrick Rose in the early 2010s. The Bulls are in a similar boat to where the extreme pockets of dominance are so good that it puts them ahead of about 80% of franchises. Now, many people are going to be surprised with this one, but the Philadelphia 76ers are number 4. The 76ers have 3 championships, one in 1955 with Dolph Schayes, one in 1967 with Wilt Chamberlain, and one in 1983 with Dr. J and Moses Malone. And the 76ers have countless top 75 players like Billy Cunningham, Dolph Schayes, Hall Greer, Allen Iverson, Moses Malone, Julius Erving, and Wilt Chamberlain. The 76ers have also been a pretty consistent team in the playoff mix. Besides the championship teams I mentioned before, the Charles Barkley 76ers were contenders in the 90s. The Iverson Sixers made it as far as the finals in 2001, where Iverson won the MVP that year. And then they had some solid teams with Andre Iguodala, and they're currently ranked 3rd in the East with Joel Embiid. But the Spurs are ranked ahead of them at number 3. The Spurs became an NBA team in 1976 and haven't looked back ever since. The team until recently has been a championship contending team their whole NBA lifetime. They went from George Gervin and Artis Gilmore in the 70s to David Robinson in the 90s, and then Tim Duncan in the 2000s, and then they added Kawhi Leonard in the 2010s. And they have 5 championships in 1999, 2003, 2005, 2007, and 2014. Overall, a very solid franchise that could be back on their way to dominance in a few years with Wemby. But let's really get into the real battle here. It's no secret that the Celtics and Lakers are the top 2 teams of all time. In terms of championships won, they're both tied at 17 for now. They've both had nearly identical records, but the Celtics are a hair above the Lakers. In terms of playoff consistency, both teams are remarkable, but the Lakers are better. And the Lakers have managed to build a more valuable brand at $6.4 billion and have better overall players. But when we really break it apart, it becomes really clear that the Lakers are the best franchise of all time. The Boston Celtics were founded in 1946 and pretty much immediately were a very good team. As soon as they drafted Bill Russell, this franchise never looked back, winning 11 championships in 13 years, 13 championships in 20 years, and 16 championships in 30 years, absolutely dominating the league with multiple different dynasties. But ever since this 30-year run of terror, the Celtics have been a below-par team in terms of living up to the greatest team of all time title. The Celtics have won one championship in the past 37 years. And while the Celtics have no trouble making the playoffs year in and year out, they've been consistently coming up short in big-time moments. So most of the Boston Celtics championships came at the earlier days of basketball when there was a lot less competition for winning and there was a lot less teams in the league. The Lakers, on the other hand, have a slightly different story. The Lakers were founded just 2 years after the Celtics in 1948, and they also immediately found success, winning 5 rings in their first 6 seasons. After this brief stretch, the Lakers have remained a pretty consistent team. They won 1 ring in the 70s, won 5 rings in the 80s, they got 0 in the 90s, they got 4 rings in the 2000s, 1 ring in the 2010s, and 1 so far in the 2000s. The remarkable resilience of this franchise, decade in and decade out, is very impressive. The Lakers' greatness doesn't only come from their championships, but also from their players, where the Lakers clearly have the majority of the game's greatest players like Kobe, Magic, LeBron, Kareem, Wilt, Shaq, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, George Mikan, Gail Goodrich, Pau Gasol, James Worthy, and Anthony Davis. And you could just blame it on the fact that they're a big market team that attracts a lot of superstars and free agents. But I still think it's impressive what they've done, no matter what.
2000 champion, Los Angeles Lakers.
The Lakers are NBA champions once again. LA wins the 2009 NBA title.
Lakers repeat back-to-back titles.